So, the big Diablo 4 patch has been released yesterday, and I want to make a video quickly summarizing all the most important things that it changed. So, let's take a look. So, first, they fixed multiple issues where players were having fun, very important. Then, fixed multiple issues where the sorcerer wasn't already weak enough, needed to nerf that one, and fixed multiple issues where players were excited for Season 1. Well, wasn't that funny? I don't know. This patch is very sad, and this user has summarized it quite well, I think. And in this video, I will try to explain from a rogue perspective. So this channel is a rogue main, rogue main account. I'm trying to explain why this patch is a big failure for all players who maybe are not that interested in playing Season 1. And yeah, let's start. So, how should we start with this? Maybe let's start with a few good things. So, things that got buffed for the classes. And like I said, this is from a rogue perspective. So, let's only talk about rogue. Well, some things got buffed. Obviously, rapid fire is a bit better now. They buffed the duration from advanced rapid fire to 5 seconds. This is like a little bit more quality of life. Then some small numbers here and there, 15% to 20, 30 lucky hit, chance of 40. Concealment stealth duration also a little bit useful, 4 to 5 seconds. Okay. Also Jeff Trap cooldown reduction 10 to 12 seconds. So some little numbers and tweaks here and there. But I guess that's already quite everything that is good about the rogue. Already here we have a very huge nerf. So Siphoning Strikes now also requires lucky hit chance of 75%. So you're not healing every time you crit, but now you need to crit and you need to hit your lucky hit chance. So you need to lucky hit, and then you need to hit 75% probability. So it's much worse now. It's much less likely to happen. And I think you immediately will feel this in the combat. So yeah, I would say this nerf alone here is much more heavy than all the little buffs that you can see above this one. So yeah, and also the aspects they nerfed, of course, maybe you can try some new aspects now. For me, the most interesting one is the how it's called. Wait a second. I think this one, aspect of Noxious Eyes, now deals up to 29% damage. So a little damage buff here if you're playing with Poison Rogue. And I will show you later why I think Poison Rogue is maybe the best rogue right now. Okay, but so this this about the buffs and the situation for rogue in general. And now let's take a look at the general balance patch for all classes, not only rogue, but also this will affect on rogue very heavily, I believe. So let's talk why I think this patch is just a big failure. So the devs nerfed a lot of stuff, and damage-wise, they nerfed, for example, critical strike damage and vulnerable damage. And not only a bit, but actually by a lot. So vulnerable damage, for example, reduced by 40%, that's very much. And critical strike damage by 17%, it's a bit less. But also on the inherent affixes, so like on critical strike damage on swords, they even nerfed it up to 50%, so half. And vulnerable damage even more, 65%. And okay, you could say, why do they do this? They argument this like here. So they say, we're seeing critical strike damage and vulnerable damage often viewed as a hard requirement for build success in Diablo 4. I agree, that's kind of true. And we believe this is a step forwards towards allowing more builds to flourish, and will continue to make changes in support of this goal. Okay, so they say, well, we don't like that critical strike damage and vulnerable damage is in all different guides and builds, so each class has to play with this affixes to get successful and to get very strong and deal a lot of damage. So we think we need to nerf this. And in advance of nerfing this, they want to buff all the other damage stuff. So here they say, we have seen that skillful players are frequently slaughtering monsters many levels above them. We want to support, but in the current variation it's beyond what we believe is correct, okay? So we are shifting power to many offensive affixes from defensive affixes. And yeah, basically they are buffing all the other damage offensive affixes, so like physical damage, fire damage, cold damage, and so on. For the rogue, maybe you could believe the most significant one is something like cutthroat, skill damage 25%. But yeah, so basically they're saying crit damage, vulnerable damage was too powerful, was too was an overused stat, and now we turned them down and increased all the other stats. So will this work? Do you think this will allow, like they said it here, like I read it, they want to have more diversity, or I don't know, is it here? No, I think it was somewhere different, but they wrote something like, yeah, we want more build diversity. We want to allow more builds to, yeah, flourish. Yeah, here we're allowing more builds to flourish, and I want to make the point that this is not true at all. And either Blizzard devs are really stupid, or I don't believe, or they did this on purpose, and they're strictly lying here. So this statement is a lie. It doesn't make sense at all, and I will show you now. So for this case, I have used my own damage calculator. In my last video, I showed you how I use my damage calculator to comparing different weapons, for example. So in this case, I used it to just calculate how the new patch is affecting my current rogue build. Okay? So I had data from my current rogue build. So I had all the different important damage brackets here. So I put my weapon base damage or weapon base DPS, then my crit chance, crit damage, vulnerable damage, main stat, additive damage, which is made up from several damage affixes, and most of them got buffed now, and also attack speed. So and then I have my true DPS kind of. So I was playing a poison build. I will make a video about this, I think. So in this build already, as you can see, I was not focusing for at crit damage at all. So my crit damage was already quite low. So yeah, this is kind of exception, since many rogues want to go for crit damage, but with poison rogue you don't really go that deep for it. And after the patch, if you calculate all the nerfs and buffs, but mostly nerfs that they did with this patch, what you like your conclusion you will get to is, okay, my rogue now deals 35% less damage. So just because of the vulnerable damage and critical strike damage and a little bit main stat nerf, my rogue overall just deals, you could say, 1/3 less damage overall. Okay, so just 1/3 damage gone. And I believe this is not only for the rogue, but I guess for classes that rely heavily on crit damage, for example, I can believe this number could go even higher, up to maybe 40%. So I believe most classes will just lose 30 to 40 damage. And you can see here, this is due to the big loss on vulnerable damage mostly. So instead of 276% vulnerable damage, after the patch I have a value of 160% vulnerable damage. So a loss of over 70% in total. And yeah, this just leads into this huge DPS drop. Okay, so now you could of course say, well, but they said we want more build diversity and we just nerf vulnerable damage and crit damage so you can increase all of the other stats like we just buffed. So physical damage, poison damage, cutthroat skill damage, all of these kind of useless stats before now are not useless anymore because we buffed them, okay? So they want players to figure out some new builds maybe. And I will show you now that this mathematically don't make sense at all. And maybe before I show you the datasheet, I can show you very quickly how damage in Diablo 4 is calculated visually. So in Diablo 4, you have these different damage brackets, okay? So you have, for example, different damage buckets, you could call it buckets. So you have the crit bucket, you have the vulnerable bucket, and the additive bucket, and also some few more. So, and in order to achieve the highest amount of DPS possible, your goal is to even out these buckets. So in best case, all of these buckets have around the same size, okay? So this is the basics of how damage in Diablo 4 is calculated. And to like visualize this example right here that I showed you with the new patch. So this was before the patch. And after the patch, what happened is basically this. The crit bucket get a bit smaller by around 12% in my case. The vulnerable bucket get very much smaller, about 72%. And even the additive bucket actually got a little bit slower because they nerfed damage to crowd control, and my unique dagger has some of it. But basically the additive buckets stayed quite the same for my rogue build at least, okay? So yeah, that's why I lose damage. Some of my buckets just got smaller. Okay, so now let's take a look at possible new builds. Okay, so this one looks a little bit more complicated. Let's just focus on the left side. I will actually zoom in a bit. Okay, so let's just focus on the left side again, right here. So I have simulated a new rogue build here on the right. I call it new build. And what I did here is, okay, so the devs make vulnerable damage and crit damage less effective. So let's just drop, for example, vulnerable damage, okay? So and with dropping, I mean not dropping completely, but let's say I'm playing with crossbow, so I still think crossbow is your only viable option for close combat rogues, because the distant damage affects on the bow, it's just still useless for you as a combat rogue, since you're always in close combat. So let's assume we still play with crossbow, and the crossbow just loses a lot of vulnerable damage, okay? But instead of the rings, so okay, wait a second, maybe I can show it here also. So this is like my rogue build on max roll. And let's say, okay, we had, wait a second, let's say we had vulnerable damage here. So vulnerable damage was on our crossbow, was on our sword offhand, and on the rings, okay? And let's say instead of the rings and the offhand or sword, We are not going for vulnerable damage anymore, but instead we are going for something like poison damage, for example. Okay, we're playing a poison rogue build, and poison got buffed a bit, I believe. Like here, poison damage increased by 25%. So let's say we're going for poison damage instead for vulnerable damage. So what happens for us? So we even lose more vulnerable damage, of course, so 60 more. This is equivalent to 176% less than before, so quite a lot. And instead of this vulnerable damage, we are increasing our poison damage. And we are also playing with some glyphs, which increase our non-physical damage even further. So you can see we jump from 175% poison damage to 250% poison damage, okay? So this is actually quite a bit. So 43% more poison damage, okay? We invest in our gear. And also damage versus poison, for example, on our offhand weapon, and something like damage versus frozen on our offhand weapon, okay? Because I'm playing with freezing enemies also quite a bit. So let's say these green numbers all get better, so we invest in these numbers in our gear. And what is the realistic outcome from this case? Well, you can see we increase our additive damage bucket from 1000% to 1200%. Well, and this increase makes only about 14% overall. While, like I said, vulnerable damage, we lose 60 to 100, and this makes about 176 compared to the old one. So basically what we do, I can show you again visually. What we did now is, well, same crit, a little bit less, but now the vulnerable bucket is much less, so much smaller than before, while the additive damage bucket is just a tiny bit bigger, so 14%. And this is just because the additive bucket already was so big that it just doesn't matter if we put a little bit more into it, it's still very big. So the effective difference is quite not there. It's not, you're not feeling this difference so much. Instead, with vulnerable damage, if this bucket was smaller already and now it gets even more small, then you will notice this very quickly because you're making this bucket even smaller. Like I said in the beginning, the way how we maximize our damage in Diablo is we need to make sure that all of our buckets are equally in the same size. So each bucket needs to be the same size in the optimal case. So yeah, what we can say is with this approach where we go away from vulnerable damage and invest into the buffed stats that Blizzard has buffed, we lose even more damage. So we go from minus 35%, we go to minus 43.5%, okay? So we lose even more damage. So again, if you calculate this, it just shows you what Blizzard has, the statement they did here. We nerf critical strike damage and vulnerable damage, and we believe this is a step towards allowing more builds to flourish. This is straight a lie. It's just not true. And so the conclusion here for all rogues who are wondering, should I now drop vulnerable damage and go for poison damage instead, for example, playing a poison build? Please don't do it. You can see clearly it will just decrease your damage even more. And so what this patch really did is not allowing some new builds to flourish or something and to make poison damage stronger and better choice. No. What this patch did is it just nerfed your damage in general. It's just you just can't do anything about it. You're just dealing a third less damage with your character. And actually, ironically, what it did now is vulnerable damage and critical damage is now even more valuable to you. So now you want even more of it than before. So for example, just for like a rough, how to say in English, I don't know. So like a rule of thumb for you, if you're wondering what is better, is it better to increase my vulnerable damage by 10%? So instead of 100%, I now have 110, for example. You see I gain about 3% damage. Or is it better to put, let's say, 30% additive damage? Oh, sorry. 30%. Oh my god. 30% is 0.3. Oh, 42%. Here, 40%. So you can see in this case, 10% vulnerable damage is better than 30% additive damage, like poison damage in my case. Okay? So you would need like, let's try it out, maybe 50%. Yeah, it's getting closer. So maybe 70%. Yeah. So you need 70% poison damage or additive damage to just make as much as damage as you would do if you add 10% vulnerable. So vulnerable damage just becomes even more valuable, okay? It's harder to get and it's more valuable, and you still want to invest as much points into vulnerable and critical damage, okay? So just that you know here, nothing has changed, it just made everything worse and it's even more powerful. So vulnerable damage, more important than ever. And don't even think of trying some new gear stats with poison damage or something. It's just worthless. Okay, this was a very long explanation, but I hope it was worth it. Now I want to shortly talk about defensive stats, because not only the damage got nerfed, but also defensive stats got nerfed. So I don't know, is it somewhere here? Yeah, total armor reduced by 30%. And then also all forms of damage reduction. So here, damage reduction from close, distant, and also from poisoned also got reduced. And with the same method, so I have another calculation here for defensive abilities. And I won't explain everything here, it will take much too long. But basically, the most important stat here is your EHP, so your effective health, okay? So basically what this says is, okay, if you have, for example, 14,000 life, okay, and you have armor and your total damage reduction, then this 14,000 health become over 2 million health. 2 million effective health just because of your damage reduction. So for my case, for example, I have about up to 99%, 99.4% damage reduction if I invest very heavily into damage reduction. And what the patch did is it reduced our armor. And here you can see for my case, it was 23% less armor. So I dropped from 14,000 to 11,000. This is if with a full disobedience aspect on 100 stacks. And also close damage reduction and poison damage reduction, I also lost quite some stats here. Okay. So, and overall, for my build, what this did is it dropped my effective health. So the most important stat in Diablo, my effective health dropped by over 140%, okay? And to make it more clear, maybe, you could also say what is your hit to death, like how many hits you need to die. And let's assume on Nightmare 100 dungeon, if a monster would deal 1 million damage to you, before the patch, I would survive actually. My hit to death would be 1.5, so I would take 1.5 hits before I would die. And after the patch, I would just straight die because it would be 0.63 hits to death, okay? So maybe it's a little bit abstract, but the basic idea is the defensive abilities has dropped by a significant amount. So yeah, 140% for in my case. It's just very much, and I think you have already noticed this. If you're playing some high tier nightmare dungeons, you should feel much less tanky than before. And also, as a rogue, you don't have healing as much as before. So yeah, I think you noticed this very quickly. So to summarize the patch, you lose a ton of defensive stats. Sorry. And you lose about a third of your damage. Well, so yeah, this was the patch, I guess. So in the future, I will make guides for rogues, for the rogues. So I will make a video where I explain where I believe the future of rogue is. So yeah, I think poison rogue. My first impression is that poison rogue will be still one of the strongest rogues, just because you are not that heavily relying on crit damage. So at least crit damage, the nerf to crit damage is not that huge. So yeah, that's what I believe for now. Poison rogue will be the future, but we need to figure this out. So yeah, if you're interested in that, then just leave me a subscription and I will keep you updated how the rogues will evolve. So, but this is it for now. Last words for the patch. I have a theory why Blizzard did this. I think they just realized that, like they said, they were surprised how many people already solved their end game content, and I really believe that this end game content, like Nightmare Dungeons 100, they were not meant to be solved that quickly. Okay, so I think they have this content more for all the seasons that are coming in the future. So their strategy is like they need to make money, and they make money by selling battle passes, and they only can sell battle passes if they will have enough players playing the seasons. So I believe most of the seasons will have very powerful mechanics, which will make the characters very strong. And in order to make them strong, they needed to nerf everything now. So now in the Eternal Realm, you will feel like shit, okay? You deal less damage, you are much less tanky than before. So in order to obtain this power you had before, you kinda need to play the seasons and to play with the new season mechanics, so you feel powerful again. And I think this is the overall strategy of Blizzard here, from maybe not the developers, but more from the management area of Blizzard. So yeah, that's why they nerf just everything to make you feel strong again in the season. But for all the players like me that are not that much interested into seasons, especially if there are no ranking systems so far, I will play seasons with rankings. But right now, this is like a fun season for me. So yeah, you have no competitive vibe into it, so it doesn't matter at all, I think. So for me, yeah, I just wanted to grind some nightmare dungeons and push some higher keys, but now it's much harder to do this. And yeah, this is my theory on why they did this. Yeah, just to allow season content to shine. And I think this is, I mean, maybe from business perspective, this is the right approach. But for all the players that are, yeah, in the end game of Diablo, it is very disappointing. So yeah, I think that's it for this video. I hope you learned something and it was a bit entertaining for you. So if this was the case, leave me a like, and I see you in the next video, guys. So have a good one and see you there. Bye bye.